And joining us now in Washington, D.C., David Frum, former speechwriter to President George W. Bush and the editor of NewMajority.com. David, good to have you on TVO again. How are you tonight?
I'm all right, thanks.
Well, this sounds like a bit of a silly way to start it, but I presume there was a day when politicians wrote their own speeches. Obviously, that day is long gone. How much of a speech that a president gives is actually written by the president?
Those days are long gone. I think the general feeling is probably Woodrow Wilson was the last president to write the majority of his own speeches. But every president has been involved in important ways in the major speeches that he gives, and that's true of inarticulate presidents like George H.W. and George W. Bush, and it's true of eloquent presidents like Barack Obama. Every president has his own system that reflects his own imperatives and needs, but it's always a very intimate kind of service to the president. You know, it's a striking thing. Speechwriters are not typically very important people. I certainly wasn't. But the best memoirs of administration so often come from the pens of speechwriters. William Safire, Peggy Noonan, the best memoir of the Roosevelt administration was by his writer, Robert Sherwood, because you have to get into the mind of the principal so intimately.
So how do you actually do that? In your case with George W. Bush, who you say was one of the less articulate presidents, obviously he didn't sit down with pen and write it, but how'd you get inside his head in order to do it?
Well, he actually had a great appreciation for the importance of speech making. So he made a point, especially in those easier days before 9/11, of sitting down with the writers informally as a group at least once a week and just talking about whatever was on his mind, in addition to the more business-like conversations he would have with him during the week. But we traveled a lot with him to watch him in action. And you always were there when he delivered a speech you had given so that you could see how he was doing, where he had trouble. Now that was the George Bush method. Different presidents have different methods.
Well, we know, of course, this president has written a couple of books, so we know he knows how to write. We know that he's much more involved in the actual penning of his speeches than say, his predecessor was. Let me play a little clip here of this is well before he was president. This is the 2004 Democratic National Convention when he introduced this notion for the first time, I think, to many people of blue states and red states. No, something quite different. Roll tape, please.
The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states. Red states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats. But I've got news for them too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around in our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states, and yes, we've got some gay friends in the red states. There are patriots who opposed the war in Iraq, and there are patriots who supported the war in Iraq. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America.
Not red states or blue states, but United States of America. That theme, do you know where he got that from?
No.
It's a good one, though, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's the essence of. I thought you were going to surprise me with the answer that Daniel Webster. No, look, but it has been Barack Obama's method that he has ideologically. Let me put it this way: one of the things that people have gotten used to in Washington is over 16 years in Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, we had presidents who were very divisive in their method, but actually quite moderate in their substance. And so people would look at the harsh style of the politics of the past 16 years and say, Clinton must be a big liberal and George Bush must be a big conservative. In fact, they were quite toward the middle. It's been a long time, all the way back to Ronald Reagan, where you had a president who was gentle in his manner, but strongly ideological in his content. And Barack Obama is in that mold. He is in no way a moderate president. He is very much to the left, but he presents his left-wing politics in a way that is an appeal to unity, that tries to be respectful of opponents, that tries to pull opponents in. Look how he's picked off these individual disaffected Republicans with appointments to important jobs like ambassador to China, secretary of the Army, most recently National Endowment of the Humanities. And that's his trademark method. But don't make any mistake, he has a very clear idea about some pretty dramatic changes he wants to make in the United States.
Having said that, though, I suspect that most people listen to that last speech, for example, that he gave 4 years before he became president. I suspect they listen to that speech in a very different way from the way you do. You no doubt are listening for certain turns of phrases, for crafting, for structure, all of that kind of stuff. So how does Obama's, speechifying differ from his predecessors in that regard?
That's a very important question. Barack Obama is the most verbally exact politician I have ever seen. Think about this case of Sonia Sotomayor, the new nominee to the Supreme Court. Now, this is a woman who's been on the federal bench for a dozen years, since the early 90s. You don't make a lot of public statements as a federal judge, and yet in her very few, very intermittent public appearances, she managed to put on the public record a sentence that has nearly sunk her candidacy. This statement that a wise Latina woman would be a better judge than a white man. Mm-hmm. Now, Barack Obama has been a politician his whole life. He's been in public life in one way or another 20 years. He's been a politician for more than a dozen. There is not one self-damaging quote in the entire record. His opponents were looking for them in 2008. He doesn't make that kind of mistake. Now, notice something else. When he speaks, he leaves always the impression that he has said more than he actually has said. You need to listen very carefully to his words, because I wouldn't want to say deceptive, but he is willing to allow you to deceive yourself in listening to him. If I can just go on with this long answer with one very concrete example. June 4th of 2009 was the date of President Obama's speech to the Muslim world. Exactly a year before, June 4th of 2008, he spoke to the American-Israel Public Affairs Conference in Washington. And this is an important group for a Democratic candidate for president. He had just locked up, the very day before, the Democratic nomination with his win in the Montana primary. Now, when you go to AIPAC, there are a couple of things they want to hear, and one of them is that you, as president, if you are president, you will be committed to a united Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That's what they cheer for. That's what they want to hear. Barack Obama, of course, is in favor of a two-state solution with a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. So how does he reconcile this problem? What he said to the delegates at AIPAC was, I am in favor of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and that city must not be divided. Now, what they thought they heard was undivided Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That's not what he said. He said two things. Capital of Israel, also the city not divided. Now, you can have the capital of Israel over in West Jerusalem, and we're going to figure out some way to make sure that the old city doesn't have barbed wire running through the middle of it, but I'm not promising you the whole city. However, for the 6 months till the election, I'm going to allow you to think that that's what I said.
Clever.
Yes, that's a word.
Okay, if that was one of his more important speeches, this one I think during the election campaign may have saved his candidacy. This was the one after the Reverend Wright business broke, and he had to give that speech in Philadelphia on race relations that he decided to give, and we're told he wrote himself, that may very well have saved his candidacy before he got the nomination. Roll tape, please.
I can no more disown him than I can disown the black community. I can no more disown him than I can disown my white grandmother, a woman who helped raise me, a woman who sacrificed again and again for me, a woman who loves me as much as she loves anything in this world, but a woman who once confessed her fear of black men who passed her by on the street, and who on more than one occasion has uttered racial or ethnic stereotypes that made me cringe. These people are part of me, and they are part of America.
That was said to be, David, the most important speech on race relations maybe since Martin Luther King Jr. What are, as you listen to that clip and others, some of the more effective rhetorical techniques that President Obama uses?
Well, look, I'm not going to agree with you on the impact or success of that speech. In fact, you'll note that speech was given, I believe, in late April of 2008. You'll notice from that point onward, Hillary Clinton outperformed Barack Obama in almost every contest. If the Democratic nomination had been decided only on the votes of states cast from that speech until June the 3rd, when the whole thing was over, Barack Obama would have lost. He was winning until that speech. Charitably, he was winning until Reverend Wright. From Reverend Wright and that speech onward, he continues to lose. So I don't think it was so effective. But that speech does illustrate the method. Here's the question that people had for Barack Obama. You're a unifier, you're the red states, blue states man, the awesome God, the gay friends. How could you sit in this church for 20 years as this hot-tempered preacher said these shocking things? Were you asleep? Were you not listening? Or do you agree with them? Now, he needed to answer that question. He didn't. He said, my answer, before I can answer that speech, I have to take you on a 45-minute long excursion through the entire history of race relations in the United States. Oh, we're out of time. I can't answer your question. How did I manage to sit there all that while? Now, that wasn't a very good answer. But what he did, and this is maybe the answer to your question, his best technique is he makes people feel I understand your point of view. So even if I don't ultimately agree with you, in fact, even if I'm stridently or strongly disagreeing with you, you are not going to come away from me feeling disrespected. You may feel dissented from, but not disrespected. That was his method in the New Orleans speech, where as a strong proponent of abortion rights, he spoke at a Catholic university and spoke in a very feeling way about people who are opponents of abortion. That's, I think, what he tried, again, I would argue, not so successfully in his speech to the Muslim world in Cairo, to make everybody feel, I understand all points of view. Now, with Cairo, we might say, what is the President of the United States doing? Saying, I'm equally familiar with the pro-American and the anti-American point of view. Isn't he supposed to be President of the United States? But that's the method, and it's powerful.
He doesn't seem to engage in ad hominem attacks against his opponents either. Is that something you think he can keep up as Washington invariably, quote unquote, gets to him the longer he's president?
That's a good method. What he concocts straw men. There are some who say that we must bring back infant sacrifice. To them, I say, under an Obama administration, there will be no sacrificing of babies to pagan gods. So he does do that. What he mostly does is he allows his opponents to attack him. But Barack Obama has mastered one of the fundamental rules of television debate, which is he who loses his temper loses the debate. And so in his kind of evasive manner, in his kind of I have understood you but I don't agree with you way, he entices his opponents to say things about him that are ever more strident. So when they call him names, when they attack him, they look unbalanced, they look unpresidential, and his stature is elevated by his refusal to criticize, although he's annoying them all the while with these straw man techniques, even as their stature is diminished. And so people like Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich and others are marginalized. And the thing I'm always appealing to Republicans to do is you have to understand the Obama method. The only way to beat him is to be more reasonable. And what is instead happening on the right is that we're having this explosion of anger theater where you have these talkers on the radio and TV who think that their job is to get their shrinking minority of supporters ever more agitated against Obama. Meanwhile, Obama is soothing and placating a larger and larger center of gravity in the country. You have to be more like him in order to defeat him.
Understood. He's quite brilliant in the way he sets up these straw men. You know, he said there are those who would recommend we do absolutely nothing right now and stand pat and don't tackle the economic crisis that we're involved with. And then he'll shoot that down in the next breath.
Right.
But there aren't that many people, I think, who are actually saying don't do anything right now. That's a clever technique.
Exactly.
How does he manage to get away with that?
He will only get away with it until he comes up with an opponent who is able actually to say, here's what my actual proposal is, and who will come up with a positive agenda. That opponent will be the person who will best him. But that doesn't seem to be in the offing right now. I think what happens with these successful political figures, Clinton was successful in his way, George W. Bush was successful for a time in his way, is that they pioneer new methods that it takes the system a while to adjust to. And American politics is having a difficult time adjusting to a Barack Obama. The man never loses his temper. You know, he is, I think, if you were to compare him to Bill Clinton had a better memory for detail than Barack Obama. I think it would not be true that if you had him in front of you and you were firing relentless question after relentless question to him about his health care program or his economic stimulus, that he would have the mastery of detail over that Bill Clinton did. But he's much more strategic than Bill Clinton. He remembers why he's doing things in a way that Bill Clinton would get distracted by a jelly donut. But Bill Clinton would get distracted on his way to achieving his effect. Barack Obama knows exactly where he's going, and he never loses his calm. He never forgets his purpose.
And just finally, David, in our last 30 seconds, in your experience, have you seen anybody better than Barack Obama at the lofty rhetoric and the soaring turns of phrases?
You know, he's like Johnny Carson. He's better than his material. Even when the speeches don't read all that well, he is able to give them a kind of uplift. He's a considerable human being, and so that infuses itself into all his words.
David, as always, good of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much and good to see you again.
Thank you, Steve.